The evening was unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that made Lee feel as if the world was holding its breath. He had returned earlier than expected from a long trip, exhausted, bruised, but longing for a glimpse of Tusum. He missed her terribly. He missed the warmth of her smile, the softness of her voice, the way her presence softened the weight he carried on his shoulders. But when he stepped into her small house, something felt wrong. Tusum was not home. The room was dim, faintly scented with dried herbs she often boiled for her nausea. A few baby items lay on the table: tiny socks, a bottle, a small crocheted hat she made in secret. Lee picked them up with trembling fingers, his heart swelling with pride he did not know he still had the right to feel. Then his eyes fell on a stack of papers half hidden beneath a cloth bag. At first he did not pay attention, but a single line, bold, cold, merciless, stole the breath from his lungs. Consultation on pregnancy termination. Lee froze. He blinked once, twice. His mind refused to accept what his eyes were seeing. The paper slipped from his fingers and drifted to the ground like something dead, something unforgivable. His pulse hammered violently, and a sharp pain shot through his chest, as if someone had reached in and crushed his heart. Tusum wanted to abort the baby? Their baby? He stumbled back, gripping the edge of the table as the world tilted. The room suddenly felt too small, too dark, suffocating. His throat tightened. He could not breathe. What hurt most wasn't the thought itself. It was the image of Tusum standing alone in a cold clinic, scared and desperate, without him. A dozen questions attacked him at once. Why didn't she tell me? Was she that afraid? Was she forced? Did she hate him that much? Did she hate the baby? But the cruelest question of all was the one he wished he didn't have to ask. Was he the reason she wanted to end their child's life? His hands shook as he lifted the stack of documents again. Among them were her ultrasound photos, tiny, blurry, precious. A heartbeat recorded. A note scribbled by the doctor. The mother seems under severe emotional stress. Lee's legs weakened. He sank onto the chair, his body numb, his heart bleeding. Memories flooded him mercilessly. The nights he couldn't reach her, the days he disappeared to protect her, the times she suffered and he wasn't there. Now her silence made sense. Her pain, her distance, her trembling smiles. He had believed he was protecting her. But maybe he had left her so alone that she felt she had no choice. A choking sound escaped him, a sound he hadn't made since he was a child. His vision blurred. He covered his face with both hands, but nothing could stop the devastation tearing through him. Tusum, why didn't you wait for me? Why did you carry this alone? Why didn't you let me protect you? The papers lay scattered around his feet like broken pieces of their future. That was the moment Lee realized, whatever pain he had endured in the past, none of it compared to this. And no matter what happened next, nothing in the world could undo what he had just discovered.
Tusum returned home just as the sun dipped behind the trees, carrying a small basket of vegetables she had bought after work. She looked tired, her hair slightly messy, her steps slow from the weight in her belly. But her eyes still held that soft glow Lee loved so much. She did not expect him to be there. The moment she opened the door, the basket slipped from her hand, lemons rolling across the floor. "Tusum?" Her voice cracked, half joy, half disbelief. He stood in the middle of the room, still holding the papers. His expression wasn't anger, it wasn't confusion, it was something far worse. Pain so deep it frightened her. "Tusum, what are these?" Her breath stopped. In his hand was the consultation paper. the secret she thought she had buried forever. Her knees weakened. Fear shot through her like lightning. For a moment, she couldn't speak. She could barely breathe. "Lee, I—" Her lips trembled. He raised the paper slightly, his voice raw. "You wanted to abort the baby." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Tusam felt her chest burn. Tears welled up instantly, blurring the outline of the man she loved more than her own life. "I didn't want to," she cried, shaking her head. "I didn't want to, I swear." Lee swallowed hard. "But you went to the clinic." "Yes," she admitted with a whisper so small it barely existed. "Why?" His voice cracked. "Why, Tusam? Was it because of me?" She covered her mouth, sobbing as her entire body shook. The guilt she had carried for months resurfaced brutally. "It was the day you disappeared. No calls, no messages. Everyone said you might never come back. I was scared, Lee. I was alone, and I didn't know what to do." Tears streamed down her face like rain. "I had no money, no job. I was sick every day. I couldn't even eat. And I kept thinking, if something happened to you, if you never returned, how could I raise a baby? How could I protect it?" Her hands trembled as she pressed them against her belly. I went to the clinic, but I couldn't sign the paper." Her voice cracked again. "I sat there for 2 hours and cried. The doctor told me to think carefully. I walked out and never went back. I swear, Lee, I never wanted to hurt our child." Lee felt the air leave his lungs. He took a small step closer. Tusam stepped back, terrified he would hate her. "Lee, I was so scared. I thought you would never come back to me. I thought if I gave birth alone, I would ruin its life. I didn't want our child to grow up without a father." Her legs gave out and she sank to the floor, sobbing helplessly. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't tell you because I was afraid you would look at me differently. Afraid you would hate me. Afraid you would walk away." Lee knelt in front of her. For the first time, he saw the truth. Not just her fear, but her strength. She had carried the baby alone. She had protected it alone. She had fought her own darkness, and she had won. He gently touched her cheek. She flinched, expecting anger. But all he said was, "Tusam, why did you suffer alone?" Her tears fell harder, but this time they mixed with relief. Lee wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close as her sobs trembled against his chest. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Their pain, their fear, their love, all of it blended into the fragile silence between them. Finally, through tears, she whispered, "I didn't abort the baby because, deep down, I hoped you would come back. I still believed in you." Lee closed his eyes, overwhelmed. Nothing in the world hurt more, and nothing in the world mattered more. For a long time, Lee held her, feeling her tears seep through his shirt. Every shaky breath she took pierced him deeper than any bullet ever could. He had survived missions, betrayals, and the darkness of the criminal underworld, but nothing had ever broken him the way Tusam's trembling confession just did. When her sobs finally softened, Lee slowly helped her sit on the couch. He knelt in front of her, his large hands gently holding her smaller ones. Her eyes were swollen, red, afraid, like she was waiting for a punishment she believed she deserved. "Tusam," he whispered, "look at me." She lifted her eyes hesitantly, and he broke. Not with anger, not with disappointment, but with an ache so raw he couldn't hide it. "You think I would leave you after everything?" His voice cracked. "You think I would walk away from you? From our baby?" Tusam lowered her gaze again. "I didn't know. You were gone, Lee. No message, no sign of life. Every day I prayed for you to come back, but people kept telling me that maybe you couldn't." Lee closed his eyes. He knew exactly which mission she was talking about. The one where he was deep undercover, the one he almost didn't survive. And while he was fighting for the country, she was fighting for their child. "Tusam," he said, voice shaking, "I didn't come back sooner because I wanted to keep you safe. I wanted to destroy every threat before returning to you. But I never meant to leave you alone." She bit her lip, tears spilling again. Lee reached out and placed his palm gently on her belly, feeling the faint warmth. This is my child too," he whispered. "Our child. And even when I was far away, even when I couldn't contact you, I carried both of you here." He pressed a hand to his chest. "Every day." Tusam covered her mouth to stifle a sob. "You should have told me," Lee continued softly. "You didn't have to suffer alone. You didn't have to cry alone. You didn't have to face fear alone." "I was scared you'd be angry," she whispered. "I'm not angry," Lee said, touching her face gently. "I'm hurting because you were hurting." The silence between them turned warm instead of heavy. Then Lee did something that stunned her. He took her hands, lifted them to his lips, and kissed them gently, one then the other, like he was apologizing for every moment she had felt alone. "Tusam," he said, voice trembling with truth, "I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." Her breath caught. "We lost so much time. I don't want to lose another second. Our baby deserves a peaceful home. You deserve someone who stays, someone who chooses you every day." Her eyes widened slightly as he leaned closer. "Tell me," Lee whispered, "can you give me another chance? Can we start over, this time together?" Tusam's heart twisted painfully. She took a deep breath, cupping his face with her trembling hands. "Yes," she whispered, "I still choose you, Lee." It was all he needed. He pulled her into his embrace again, holding her like something precious, something he thought he had lost forever. And for the first time in months, both of them could finally breathe. Because even after the deepest wound, love still found its way back.
The morning light slipped gently through the window, painting soft gold across the room. Tusam stood quietly in the kitchen, her hands resting over her belly as she looked out at the small garden she had tended alone for months. But today, she wasn't alone anymore. Lee stepped behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. His touch was warm, steady, so different from the emptiness she had grown used to. "Tusam, from now on, no fear, no pain, no decisions you have to make alone. I will walk beside you, every day, every step." She closed her eyes, leaning into him. "I'm still scared," she admitted softly. "I know," Lee answered, "but I will calm every fear. I will protect you and our baby. Not because it's my duty, but because it's my promise." He gently turned her to face him. Then he reached into his pocket and opened his hand. Inside lay the small silver ring he had carried on his missions, the one he had intended to give her before everything fell apart. "I should have given you this long ago, but if you accept it now, it means we start again. Honest. Together." Tears welled in her eyes, but they were no longer tears of fear. She nodded. "Put it on me, Lee." With hands that trembled only from emotion, he slid the ring onto her finger. Then he kissed her, soft, slow, full of belief and forgiveness. Outside, The wind moved gently through the garden. Inside, two wounded hearts found a quiet, beautiful beginning. And for the first time, the future didn't feel frightening. It felt like hope. It felt like home.